Have you ever dealt with a homeowners association that seemed to think the association part meant they owned everything, including your personal property? I have. And I'm not just talking about a nasty letter for leaving your trash cans out an hour too long. I'm talking about the kind of audacious, mind-boggling entitlement that leads someone to believe they can commandeer your private two-car garage and use it as their personal storage unit. The HOA president in my neighborhood, a woman whose name might as well have been Karen but was actually Brenda, decided my garage was the perfect place to park her two massive rust bucket work trucks. She didn't ask. She didn't even have the courtesy to pretend it was an emergency. She just did it, leaving a smarmy little note on my front door as if she'd done me a favor. Most people in this situation would probably get angry, make a lot of noise, and eventually get bogged down in a legal swamp. But Brenda made one catastrophic miscalculation. She assumed I was just some quiet pushover engineer who would roll over. What she didn't know was that my grandfather, Frank, is a retired master welder and fabricator, a man who views problems not as obstacles, but as invitations to build something incredibly permanent and inconvenient for the person causing the problem. She thought she was messing with one man. She was about to find out she had declared war on 2 generations of meticulous planning and industrial-grade problem-solving. This isn't just a story about getting even. It's a detailed account of how a bit of structural engineering, a whole lot of high-tensile steel, and a grandfather with a mischievous streak turned one woman's arrogance into a very public, very expensive, and very, very stationary lesson in property rights. Have you ever wished you could give a bully a taste of their own medicine so perfectly that they could do nothing but sputter in defeat? Well, pull up a chair, because I'm about to tell you exactly how we did it, and trust me, the satisfaction is something you'll be able to feel through the screen. My journey into this suburban battlefield began, as many do, with the pursuit of peace. I'd just bought my first home, a modest but well-built house in a neighborhood that appeared, on the surface, to be the epitome of quiet American life. My name is Alex, and I'm a civil engineer. My life revolves around precision, blueprints, and the immutable laws of physics. I find comfort in order, in things being exactly where they are supposed to be. That's why the garage was the selling point for me. It wasn't just a space. It was a sanctuary. Poured concrete floors, perfectly level, rated for far more weight than my simple sedan would ever exert. High ceilings, ample wiring for any project I could dream of, and a brand new insulated door that closed with a satisfying solid thud. It was a blank canvas of potential, a place I intended to fill with shelves of organized tools, a workbench for my hobbies, and my car singular. My grandfather, Frank, had helped me inspect it before I bought the place. He ran his calloused hands over the support beams, stomped on the concrete, and declared it a damn fine box. For a man who spent 45 years fabricating steel for bridges and skyscrapers, this was the highest form of praise. The day it all went wrong started like any other Tuesday. I'd spent a long day at the office reviewing geotechnical surveys, my mind a swirl of soil compression ratios and shear strength calculations. All I wanted was to come home, pull my car into its pristine shelter, and decompress. As I turned onto my street, I noticed Brenda's oversized pickup truck parked in her driveway, as usual, but alongside it was another, equally large and dilapidated truck. Both bore the faded logo of Brenda's Bespoke Contracting, a business I suspected was neither bespoke nor licensed. I didn't think much of it until I pressed the button on my garage door opener. The door whirred upwards, revealing a scene that completely shattered my sense of order. There, parked side by side, filling my sanctuary from wall to wall, were Brenda's 2 enormous trucks. They were so tightly packed in that the passenger doors were likely unusable. A trickle of what looked like oil was already beginning to stain my immaculate floor beneath one of them. For a moment, I just sat in my car blinking. It was a reality disconnect moment, like seeing a cow in your living room. It simply did not compute. I got out of my car, my briefcase slipping from my suddenly numb fingers, and walked toward the garage in a daze. Stuck to my front door was a piece of cheap notebook paper, held by a piece of Scotch tape. The note, written in an aggressive, loopy cursive, read, "Hi neighbor, had to clear my driveway for some urgent resurfacing work. The HOA bylaws allow for temporary use of available facilities in an emergency. We'll be out of your way in a few days. Thanks for being a team player. Brenda, HOA President. Team player? Emergency? Available facilities? Each phrase was a little needle of condescending arrogance. This wasn't an emergency. It was a convenience for her. And she hadn't just used my driveway. She had invaded my home, a locked, private part of my property. The sheer audacity was breathtaking. My initial shock quickly curdled into a cold, quiet rage. The engineer in me saw a violation of boundaries, a disruption of a carefully balanced system. The homeowner in me felt violated and disrespected. I took a deep breath, the smell of old exhaust and leaking fluid filling my senses, and looked at the two metal behemoths squatting in my garage. Brenda had started this. She had brought chaos into my orderly world. What she couldn't possibly comprehend was that an engineer, especially one raised by a man like my grandpa, doesn't just get mad. We get methodical. We analyze the problem, identify the structural weaknesses of our opponent, and then we build a solution. And the solution I was beginning to formulate wasn't going to be temporary. The first step in any conflict is to attempt a peaceful resolution. It's the logical, adult thing to do, and it's a crucial step in establishing who the reasonable party is when things inevitably escalate. So, after taking a few minutes to get my heart rate back into a non-apoplectic range, I walked across the street. My footsteps felt heavy on the pavement, each one a testament to my rising indignation. I was rehearsing my opening line, aiming for firm but not aggressive. "Brenda, we need to talk about the trucks," seemed about right. Her house was a mirror image of mine, but where I favored Spartan neatness, her yard was a chaotic jumble of gnomes, gazing balls, and live, laugh, love signs that seemed deeply ironic at the moment. I rang the doorbell, and after a long wait, the door creaked open to reveal Brenda herself. She was a woman who seemed perpetually braced for an argument, with a tight perm and eyes that narrowed in suspicion before you'd even spoken. "Alex," she said, her tone not one of greeting but of impatient acknowledgement. "Something I can help you with." She was holding a half-empty glass of wine, and it was barely 5 p.m. "Yes, Brenda," I began, keeping my voice level. "About the trucks. You can't park them in my garage. I need you to move them now." She took a slow sip of her wine, looking at me over the rim of the glass as if I were a particularly dense child. "Oh, that," she said with a dismissive wave of her hand. "Don't be so dramatic," I explained in the note. "It's an emergency. My driveway guys showed up a day early. They're tearing it all up tomorrow morning. The trucks will be out of your hair in, 3-4 days? Be a good neighbor." The condescension was so thick I could almost taste it. "Brenda, that's not an emergency," I countered, my patience already fraying. "An emergency is a fire or a flood. This is a planned renovation that you failed to properly arrange storage for. My garage is not a public facility. It's private property. I need to park my own car, and frankly, I don't want 2 heavy-leaking commercial vehicles in there." She actually scoffed. A full, theatrical, "How dare you scoff?" As I said in my note, she enunciated slowly, as if I had trouble with simple words. "The HOA covenants and bylaws, which you agreed to when you bought your lovely little house, give the board president, that's me, the authority to take necessary actions in an emergency to maintain the community's standards and safety. Your empty garage was the safest place to secure my vehicles, preventing them from cluttering up our beautiful street." It was a masterclass in bureaucratic babble, a word salad designed to intimidate and confuse. But I design things that have to withstand hurricanes. I'm not easily intimidated by verbal blustering. "Which specific bylaw are you referring to, Brenda? Could you show it to me?" "Because I've read the summary I was given at closing, and I don't recall anything about you having the right to confiscate private garages." Her eyes hardened. The thin veneer of neighborly condescension peeled back to reveal the petty tyrant underneath. "Look, I don't have time to hold your hand and walk you through the entire legal document. It's in there. Section C, I think. Emergency provisions. Now, if you continue to be uncooperative, I'll have to consider levying a fine against you for failure to comply with an official HOA directive. We can start at $200 a day. How does that sound?" My jaw tightened. This was her move. Not just to deflect, but to attack. to turn her transgression into my violation. It was brilliant in its sheer, unadulterated gall. "You're going to fine me for not letting you illegally store your personal vehicles in my locked garage?" I asked, my voice dangerously quiet. "You're trespassing, Brenda. If those trucks are not out of my garage by the time I get back from dinner, I will be calling the police to report them as abandoned vehicles on my property." This was a bluff, and we both knew it. The police would likely call it a civil matter and tell us to sort it out ourselves, but it was the only card I felt I had to play at that moment. Brenda's smile was a predatory slash. "You do that?" she hissed. "You call them, and when they get here, I'll show them the bylaws and my presidential authority. I'll tell them about your threatening behavior. We'll see whose side they take, the respected head of the community or the new guy who's causing trouble his first month in." "Your move, Alex." She drained her wine glass, slammed the door in my face, and that was that. I stood on her porch, the laugh sign mocking me, feeling utterly defeated. I had tried reason. I had tried standing my ground. I had been met with lies, threats, and a locked door. I walked back to my house, the sight of those trucks in my garage now a symbol of my own powerlessness. Brenda was right about one thing. It was my move. And as I sat in my car, parked on the street in front of my own house, a deep, cold determination began to settle in. She wanted to play by the book? Fine, I would read the entire damn library. And I knew just the man to help me interpret the fine print. Defeated and fuming, I did what any sensible man in his 30s does when faced with a problem that seems insurmountable. I called my grandpa. Frank answered on the second ring, his voice a familiar, reassuring rumble. "Hey, kid, what's wrong? You sound like someone replaced your coffee with decaf." I explained the situation, the words tumbling out in a torrent of frustration. The trucks, the oily stains, the smarmy note, the door slammed in my face, the threat of fines. I laid it all out, expecting him to share in my outrage, to curse Brenda's name and suggest a variety of direct, if slightly illegal, solutions involving tow trucks and remote locations. Instead, he was silent for a long moment when I finished. All I could hear was the faint sound of the television in his workshop. "Grandpa, you there?" "I'm here," he finally said, his voice surprisingly calm. "So, the dragon lady thinks she's a queen, eh? Quoting rules and regulations at you." "She's not just quoting them, she's making them up." She said something about Section C, emergency provisions. "Section C," Frank repeated slowly. "Alex, did you get a full copy of the HOA covenants when you closed on the house? Not the little welcome pamphlet. I mean the big one. The one that's 100 pages long and looks like it was written by lawyers who hate joy. Yeah, it's in a digital file somewhere." A huge PDF. I glanced at it. "It's mostly boilerplate about lawn maintenance and fence heights." "No," Frank corrected me, his tone shifting into the one he used when he was about to teach me something important. "It's never mostly boilerplate. That's what they want you to think. People like Brenda, these little tyrants, they thrive because nobody ever reads the whole book. They read a line, twist it, and then count on you being too lazy or too busy to check their work. Your move isn't to call the cops, not yet. Your move is to become the world's leading expert on the Northwood Estates Homeowners Association covenants, conditions, and restrictions." It was not the call to arms I had expected. It was a call to homework. But he was right. I was an engineer. My entire career was built on understanding complex documents and finding the critical details everyone else missed. Why was I letting Brenda beat me at my own game? "So you want me to read the whole thing?" "Every word, Alex," he said. "Read it like it's a blueprint for the most important project of your life. Because it is. Find that Section C she's so proud of. See what it actually says. Then, keep reading. Look for the parts that define private property, that define what a vehicle is, what parking is, what her authority actually is. Look for her weaknesses. The rulebook she's hitting you with is a weapon. You need to learn how to wield it better than she does. And while you're at it, do a little digging on Brenda's bespoke contracting. See how bespoke the county clerk thinks it is." The fog of my anger began to clear, replaced by a sense of purpose. Frank had given me a strategy. He hadn't just sympathized. He'd given me a blueprint for the counteroffensive. "Okay, Grandpa, okay, I will." After we hung up, I felt a renewed energy. I went to my computer, found the file named HOA CCR's Final PDF, and opened it. 147 pages of dense, single-spaced legalese stared back at me. I poured a strong cup of coffee, sat down, and began to read. The first hour was a slog. Rules about satellite dishes, basketball hoops, and the approved shades of beige for exterior paint. But then, on page 42, I found it, Section C, Emergency Powers and Provisions. My heart beat a little faster. I read the paragraph, then read it again. It stated that the HOA board could take reasonable measures on common areas in the event of a natural disaster, catastrophic utility failure, or imminent threat to the health and safety of the community. There it was. The key phrases, reasonable measures, and common areas. My garage was not a common area. It was deeded private property, and her driveway renovation was not a natural disaster. She hadn't just twisted the rule, she had fabricated its application out of whole cloth. This was the first crack in her armor. Feeling emboldened, I kept reading. I devoured sections on property rights, on trespassing, on the board's limitations. I highlighted every sentence that reinforced the sanctity of a homeowner's private dwelling, including attached garages. I found the section on nuisances, which specifically mentioned leaking automotive fluids and storage of commercial equipment. I highlighted that too. Then, following Frank's advice, I opened a new browser tab and did a search for her business on the state's official registry. Nothing. I checked the county's database for licensed contractors. Nothing. Brenda's Bespoke Contracting was a ghost. It was just a name she'd slapped on the side of her trucks to look official. She was likely doing undeclared, under-the-table work. This was more than a crack in her armor. This was a gaping hole. I leaned back in my chair, a slow smile spreading across my face. The document that Brenda used as her scepter of power was actually a loaded gun pointed directly at her own head. She had handed me all the ammunition I would ever need. Now, it was time to call my master fabricator of a grandfather back and start designing the bullet. The second phone call to my grandfather was entirely different from the first. The frustration in my voice was gone, replaced by the thrill of discovery. "I've got her, Grandpa," I said without even a hello. "I've got her dead to rights." I could almost hear him smile through the phone. "Attaboy. Lay it on me." I spent the next 20 minutes walking him through my findings, my voice buzzing with the kind of excitement I usually reserved for a perfectly executed concrete stress test. I explained the precise wording of Section C, the clear distinction between common areas and my private, deeded garage. I read him the nuisance clauses about leaking fluids and commercial equipment. I told him about her unregistered, unlicensed sham of a contracting business. With each piece of evidence I laid out, I could feel the strategic possibilities beginning to crystallize. Frank listened patiently, letting out a low whistle when I got to the part about the unlicensed business. "So she's not just a bully," he said. "She's a cheat." That's even better. People like that, they build their whole world on a foundation of bluffs. The moment you prove you're holding a better hand, they don't just fold, they fall apart. "So, what's the next play?" I asked, my mind racing. "Do I send her a cease and desist letter? Present this to the rest of the HOA board?" "No," Frank said immediately, his voice dropping into a conspiratorial tone. "That's checkers. We're going to play chess." A letter gives her time to react, to invent more lies, to rally her little cronies on the board. We're not going to give her a warning shot. We're going to build a cage and let her walk right into it. A silence hung on the line as I processed that. A cage. What kind of cage? I asked, intrigued. "She's using your property because she thinks it's easy and free," he explained, the sound of him pacing in his workshop now audible. "We're going to make it impossible and expensive. Those trucks are on your property. You have the right to secure your property, don't you? Nothing in that rulebook says you can't install a security feature on your own driveway, does it?" "No," I said, already seeing where he was going. "It encourages security measures, actually. Cameras, reinforced doors. Forget doors. he said, his voice alight with creative fire. Think bigger. Think more. Permanent. Remember those steel bollards we saw outside the federal building last year? The ones designed to stop a truck bomb? Yeah, I said. The thick concrete-filled steel posts. Exactly, he declared. We're going to give your garage a little security upgrade. We're going to install 3 of those, right behind where her trucks are parked. We'll sink them 3 feet deep in your driveway, fill them with reinforced concrete, and weld some nice, heavy-duty caps on top. She won't be able to back out. She won't be able to maneuver around them. Her trucks will be part of your permanent landscaping. I was stunned into silence. The sheer, beautiful simplicity of it was breathtaking. It wasn't destructive. It wasn't aggressive. It was construction. It was a home improvement project. It was legally and beautifully defensible. We'd be installing a permanent fixture to solve a temporary problem, I mused, the engineer in me automatically running through the logistics. We'd need a core drill for the concrete, high-strength quickret, rebar for reinforcement. I've got a buddy who'll rent us a core drill for a case of beer, Frank cut in. I've got scrap steel pipe in the shop that's perfect for the posts. Schedule 80, half-inch wall. Overkill, just the way I like it. We can do the whole thing in one night. She goes to bed thinking she's won. She wakes up to find her business assets are part of a modern art installation titled Consequences. A wide grin spread across my face. This was perfect. It was a plan that combined my knowledge of structural requirements with his hands-on fabrication skills. It was a symphony of petty, righteous vengeance, played in the key of civil engineering and heavy metal. This is brilliant, Grandpa. It's what she deserves, he said simply. She wants to use your property without asking? Fine. Now she can't use it at all. And the best part, Alex, is the moment she comes screaming at you. You don't yell back. You just look calm. You tell her you were concerned about security in the neighborhood and decided to upgrade your property, as is your right. You show her the highlighted copy of the bylaws that prove she's trespassing. You let her be the one who looks crazy. We spent the next hour refining the plan. I would take precise measurements, calculating the exact placement of the bollards to be maximally effective, leaving no wiggle room. I'd create a little blueprint. Frank would start cutting and prepping the steel pipes. We made a shopping list. Bags of concrete, rebar, a level, mixing tubs. We set our timeline. 2 days from now, in the dead of night. We would become ghosts, radically and permanently altering the landscape of my property while the Dragon Lady slept, dreaming her smug dreams of power. When I hung up the phone that night, the anger I had felt was completely gone. It had been transmuted into something far more powerful. A project plan. Brenda had wanted me to be a team player. Fine. My grandpa and I were the team, and we were about to play a game she would never forget. While Grandpa Frank and I were meticulously plotting our nocturnal construction project, Brenda seemed to be doubling down on her campaign of obnoxious overconfidence. It was as if she could sense my initial compliance and mistook it for weakness, deciding to press her advantage. The day after our confrontation, I came home from work to find a new violation. Not content with occupying my garage, she had now parked her personal luxury sedan, gleaming white Lexus at the very end of my driveway, blocking the small walkway to my front door. It forced me to walk across the lawn to get into my own house. There was no note this time. There was no pretense of an emergency. It was a pure, unadulterated power move, a middle finger rendered in chrome and leather. She was marking her territory, sending a clear message. This whole area belongs to me. Your property lines are merely suggestions. This small act of aggression, far from intimidating me, only hardened my resolve. It was like adding another bag of concrete to our plan. Every bit of her arrogance just made the foundation of our trap stronger. The following morning, I received an email with the subject line, Official HOA Notice. It was from Brenda, of course. It was a formally formatted letter, complete with the HOA logo she had clearly copy-pasted from the website. It was a warning, citing my hostile and uncooperative attitude, and formally restating her fabricated authority to use my garage. It ended with a chilling sentence. Further failure to cooperate will result in the immediate imposition of daily fines and a review of your membership in the community. A review of my membership. She was threatening to try and force me out of the home I had just bought. The audacity was so profound it was almost comical. She was the one breaking rules, violating property laws, and running an unlicensed business out of our quiet residential neighborhood, and she was threatening me. I saved a PDF of the email and added it to my growing folder of evidence, which I had labeled simply The Brenda Project. That afternoon, Frank and I executed our own mission, the supply run. We met at a large home improvement store on the other side of town, far from our neighborhood. Pushing a heavy-duty flat cart through the wide aisles felt like a scene from a heist movie. Frank, with his silver hair and air of absolute competence, looked like the seasoned pro. I was his eager apprentice. We were a two-man crew on a mission. "All right, Alex," he said, tapping a pallet of concrete bags. "We need the high-strength stuff. 5,000 PSI cure strength. No shortcuts." We loaded 10 80-pound bags onto the cart. The strain, a satisfying affirmation of the project's seriousness. Next was the rebar aisle. "Get the half-inch diameter," he instructed. "We'll cut it into 4-foot lengths, one for each post, to give the concrete some tensile backbone." We added a bundle of rusty steel rods to our pile. We picked up a heavy-duty mixing tub, a new shovel, and a set of trowels. Every item we added to the cart felt like another nail in Brenda's coffin. The final piece of the puzzle was the core drill. Frank's buddy ran a small tool rental shop tucked away in an industrial park. The place smelled of oil and metal, a scent I found deeply comforting. Frank introduced me to a grizzled man named Sal, who looked at our shopping list, then at us, and broke into a grin. "Someone building a fortress?" he asked. "Just a little home security upgrade," Frank replied with a wink. Sal led us to a beast of a machine. It was a heavy, industrial core drill with a diamond-tipped bit the size of a coffee can. "She'll go through asphalt and concrete like butter," Sal said, patting its motor. "Just keep a little water on the bit to keep it cool, and let the weight of the machine do the work. Don't force it." As Sal showed me how to operate the drill, I felt a surge of confidence. This was my world. Machinery, torque, load specifications. Brenda could play her games with words and fake rules, but this was the real world. This was physics. And in a contest between her arrogance and 5,000 PSI concrete reinforced with steel, I knew which one would win. We loaded everything into the back of Frank's old but immaculate pickup truck, covering our haul with a tarp. The weight of the concrete and steel made the truck's suspension groan, and the solid mass of it all felt like justice itself. As we drove back towards his workshop, Frank was uncharacteristically quiet. "You know," he said finally, looking over at me, "your grandmother, she never understood why I love this stuff, building things. She thought it was just noise and dirt, but there's an honesty to it. You can't lie to concrete. You can't bluff a steel beam. It either holds or it fails. It's real." I knew exactly what he meant. We were about to introduce Brenda to something unequivocally real. As I drove home, I saw her Lexus still defiantly parked in my driveway. A smug little smile was on her face as she watered her plastic flamingos. She gave me a little wave, a gesture of triumphant ownership. I just smiled back and gave a polite nod. Let her have her moment. Let her feel like the queen of her tiny beige kingdom. She had no idea that her reign was set to expire at sunrise. The team was assembled, the materials were acquired, and the plan was in motion. The night was coming, and with it, the reckoning. The operation was scheduled for 1:00 a.m. I spent the evening in a state of controlled anxiety, pacing my living room and periodically peeking through the blinds like a spy in a low-budget film. The neighborhood settled into its usual quiet rhythm. Lights in windows blinked off one by one. Brenda's Lexus was eventually moved from my driveway back to hers, but the two offending trucks remained entombed in my garage, silent and imposing. It was a moonless night, a perfect cloak for our activities. At precisely 12:45 a.m., I saw the headlights of Frank's truck turn onto my street. He killed the engine at the curb and coasted the last 50 feet into my driveway, coming to a silent stop. It was a move worthy of a commando. I slipped out my front door and met him. He was already lowering the tailgate, his movements efficient and quiet. "Ready to make some permanent decisions, kid?" he whispered, a grin flashing in the dim light from a distant street lamp. We worked in hushed tones, a well-rehearsed team. First, we unloaded the 10 bags of concrete, stacking them neatly on a tarp on the lawn to avoid any mess. Then came the rebar, the mixing tub, and the tools. The last and most formidable piece of equipment was the core drill. It was heavy and awkward, and we carried it between us, its metallic bulk feeling like a sacred object. I had already marked the locations for the 3 bollards, with small, almost invisible chalk marks on the concrete driveway. They were spaced 4 feet apart, centered directly behind the garage door, about 3 feet back. This spacing was critical, wide enough that it couldn't be mistaken for a parking curb, but narrow enough that no vehicle could possibly snake its way through. "All right," I whispered, pointing to the center mark. "Let's start here." Frank nodded. We positioned the heavy base of the core drill over the mark. I connected a garden hose, setting it to a bare trickle of water as Sal had instructed, directing the flow onto the massive diamond bit. The moment of truth had arrived. This was the point of no return. The drill was by far the noisiest part of the plan, and the one most likely to attract unwanted attention. "Deep breath," Frank said, sensing my hesitation. "The sooner we start, the sooner we're done." I nodded, took the handles, and flipped the switch. The machine roared to life. It wasn't a deafening explosion, but in the dead stillness of the suburban night, the powerful hum of the electric motor and the grinding crunch of the diamond bit eating into concrete sounded like a jet engine. I flinched, expecting lights to flick on in every house on the block. But nothing happened. The sound was surprisingly contained, muffled by the houses and the ambient white noise of the city. I followed Sal's advice, letting the machine's weight do the work, my hands just guiding it. Slowly, steadily, the bit sank into my driveway. Concrete dust mixed with the water to form a gray slurry that oozed around the base. It was a messy, brutal process, but it was working. Frank stood watch, his eyes scanning the street, a silent sentinel. After about 15 minutes, which felt like an eternity, the bit punched through the bottom of the concrete slab. I killed the motor, and the sudden silence was almost as loud as the noise had been. We had one hole. We used a pair of heavy tongs to pull the solid concrete core out of the hole. It was a perfect cylinder, about 6 inches across and nearly a foot deep. We still needed to dig another 2 feet into the packed earth beneath. That part was quieter, done with a post-hole digger, a grueling manual task. We took turns, scooping out dirt, sweat beading on our foreheads despite the cool night air. By the time we had the first hole dug to a depth of 3 feet, my respect for professional fence installers had increased 1,000-fold. The process was repeated twice more. Drill, roar, grind, silence. Dig, grunt, sweat. With each completed hole, our confidence grew. We were a machine, a 2-man construction crew fueled by coffee and righteous indignation. The houses around us remained dark and silent. Our stealthy invasion was going unnoticed. As we finished the third and final hole, a faint gray light was beginning to touch the eastern sky. Dawn was approaching. The clock was ticking. Now came the part of the plan that belonged to Frank. He brought the 3 heavy steel pipes he had pre-cut in his shop. They were magnificent objects, thick, imposing, and utterly uncompromising. This was his art form. With the 3 gaping holes in my driveway standing ready, we moved into the final, frantic phase of the operation. The sky was now a bruised purple, and the first birds were beginning to sing, their cheerful chirps sounding like an alarm clock counting down our remaining time. Phase 2 was concrete. I sliced open the first bag of high-strength mix, the fine gray powder puffing into the air. We dumped 4 bags into the mixing tub, and I added water from the hose, following the ratio in my head. Frank grabbed the shovel and began to mix, his movements powerful and efficient. It was a thick, heavy slurry, and turning it over was hard work. "It's all in the wrist," he grunted, showing me how to fold the mixture to ensure every grain was hydrated. Once the concrete was ready, a perfect, lumpy gray, we began the installation. We lifted the first massive steel pipe and carefully lowered it into the center hole. It stood there, a black monolith against the dawn. I held it perfectly straight, using a level to check it on 2 axes, while Frank began shoveling the wet concrete into the hole around it. He packed it down with a piece of rebar, eliminating air pockets, his focus absolute. Once the hole was filled to the brim, the post was locked in place, an immovable object. I used a trowel to smooth the surface, giving it a clean, professional finish around the base. It looked incredible. It looked like it had been there for years. We repeated the process for the other 2 posts, working with a desperate urgency as the world began to wake up around us. A lone newspaper delivery car drove down the street, its headlights sweeping over us for a moment. We froze like statues, but the car kept going without slowing. My heart was pounding in my chest. We were so close. With the last post secured and the concrete smoothed, there was only one final touch left. This was Frank's signature, the master's flourish on our collaborative masterpiece. He wheeled his small portable welder from the truck, pulled down his welding mask, and handed me one. "The capstone," he said, his voice muffled by the mask. He had fabricated 3 thick, beveled steel caps for the tops of the posts. They weren't just for looks. They would prevent anyone from trying to hook a chain inside the posts to pull them out. He struck an arc, and a brilliant, searing blue-white light cut through the morning gloom. The sharp hiss and crackle of the welding rod filled the air as he laid a perfect, uniform bead around the top of the first post, permanently joining the cap to the pipe. The smell of ozone and molten metal was the smell of victory. He moved with the unhurried grace of a true craftsman, welding the other 2 caps with the same precision. When he finished the last one and lifted his mask, the sun was officially above the horizon. Golden light spilled onto the street, glinting off the fresh, dark steel of our handiwork. They were beautiful. 3 impassive, unyielding sentinels standing guard. They didn't look like a trap. They looked like an expensive, professionally installed security feature. We immediately began the cleanup, working with feverish speed. We scraped up every last pebble of spilled concrete. We rinsed the driveway, washing the dust and slurry into the grass. We loaded the tools, the empty bags, and the heavy core drilled back into Frank's truck. We left no trace of our work, no evidence of the frantic, sweaty, and exhilarating night we had just spent. When we were done, my driveway looked pristine, except for the 3 new bollards that now made my garage the most secure on the block. Frank gave the center post a solid kick with his work boot. It didn't budge. It was as if it had grown from the center of the earth. He looked at them, then looked at me, and a slow, proud smile spread across his face. "Now that," he said, "is a solution." He clapped me on the shoulder, got into his truck, and drove away just as the first of my neighbors were emerging to get their morning papers. I walked back inside, my body aching but my spirits soaring. I went to my office and set up a small security camera in the window, aimed squarely at the front of my garage. I pulled up the live feed on my computer monitor, poured myself a giant mug of coffee, and sat down to wait. The trap was set. The bait was in place. All that was left was for the dragon to wake up and discover her new cage. The wait was both agonizing and delicious. I sat in my home office, the live feed from the security camera displayed on one of my monitors, a silent black and white film of my own front yard. The morning unfolded in its typical suburban fashion. People backed out of their driveways to go to work. A school bus rumbled past. A man walked his golden retriever. And through it all, my 3 new steel sentinels stood their silent, implacable watch over Brenda's imprisoned trucks. My heart gave a little jolt every time a car drove by, but the morning wore on without incident. It was just after 9:30 a.m. when the show began. On the monitor, I saw Brenda's front door swing open. She emerged, clad in a pink tracksuit, holding a large travel mug. She had a bounce in her step, the confident strut of someone who believes they are in complete control of their universe. She walked down her driveway, stopping to admire the work of the concrete crew, who were already there, breaking up her old driveway with jackhammers. Then, She turned and headed for my house. The moment of discovery was everything I had hoped for, and more. She walked toward my garage, presumably to retrieve her trucks, and then she stopped dead. The camera wasn't close enough to see the fine details of her expression, but her entire posture changed. The jaunty bounce vanished, her shoulders stiffened. She took a tentative step forward, then another, as if approaching a strange, alien object. She circled the first bollard, her head cocked in disbelief. She touched it, probably expecting it to be a cheap plastic prop. I could imagine the jarring sensation of her hand meeting cold, solid, unyielding steel. She moved to the next one, then the third, her movements becoming more frantic. The camera watched her complete a full, confused circle around the installation. Then came the dawning comprehension. Her body language shifted from confusion to pure, unadulterated rage. She marched up to my front door and began hammering on it with her fist. The sound echoed through my quiet house. I took a slow, calming sip of my coffee and did not move. I just watched her on the screen. Her hammering grew more insistent, punctuated by muffled shouts I couldn't quite make out. "Alex, get out here! What is this? What did you do?" Her voice was shrill, laced with a hysteria that was immensely satisfying. When it was clear I wasn't going to answer the door, she stormed back to the bollards. She tried to push one. It was like watching a fly try to move an anvil. She kicked it, which I imagine hurt her foot far more than the half-inch thick steel pipe filled with 5,000 psi concrete. Her frustration was escalating into a full-blown public tantrum. She got out her phone, her fingers jabbing at the screen. A few minutes later, she was pacing back and forth in front of my house, yelling into the phone. I could only guess she was calling the HOA management company, or perhaps one of her board allies, expecting them to dispatch a magical key to unlock my property. But there was no key. There was only concrete and steel. Her performance began to attract an audience. My next-door neighbor, Mr. Henderson, a quiet retiree who spent most of his time gardening, came out onto his porch. Across the street, another family paused their yard work to watch the unfolding drama. Brenda, lost in her fury, was completely oblivious to the spectacle she was creating. She was putting on a one-woman show titled "The Consequences of My Own Actions," and the whole neighborhood had a front-row seat. Finally, she made the move I had been waiting for. The one our entire strategy was built around. She called the police. I watched on my monitor as she gestured wildly, pointing at the bollards, at my garage, at my front door. She was playing the victim, and from a distance, she was probably quite convincing. About 15 minutes later, the inevitable happened. A police cruiser turned onto our street, its lights not flashing, but its presence official and serious. It pulled up to the curb right in front of my house. Brenda rushed toward the officer as he got out of his car, launching into a high-speed, high-volume explanation, her arms waving like windmills in a hurricane. This was it. Showtime. I took another deep, steadying breath. I grabbed the folder I had prepared the Brenda project and walked calmly toward my front door. It was time to make my entrance. I opened my front door and stepped out into the bright morning sun, deliberately projecting an aura of calm, polite confusion, as if I were merely investigating a neighborhood commotion. The scene in my driveway was pure theater. Brenda was in mid-rant, pointing an accusatory finger at the bollards. "And I came out this morning and he's installed these illegal metal things. He's trapped my trucks. It's vandalism. He's holding my property hostage. You have to arrest him." The police officer, a tall man whose expression was one of weary patience, turned his gaze to me as I approached. "Sir, are you the owner of this property?" he asked, his tone neutral. "I am," I said, extending a hand. "Alex, is there a problem, officer?" My calm demeanor seemed to throw Brenda for a loop. She had clearly expected me to come out yelling, to engage in a shouting match that would make us both look unhinged. My quiet civility was not part of her script. "Ma'am, let me talk to him," the officer said, holding up a hand to silence Brenda's continued sputtering. He turned back to me. "This lady is claiming you vandalized her vehicles and are preventing her from accessing them." I nodded thoughtfully, as if considering a reasonable engineering problem. "Well, that's a misunderstanding," I said in a measured tone. "Those vehicles which belong to her are trespassing in my private garage without my permission. As for these," I gestured to the brand new bollards, I was concerned about a recent string of break-ins in the area and decided to upgrade the security on my property. They're security bollards. Perfectly legal. I installed them last night. Brenda let out a sound that was halfway between a gasp and a shriek. "He's lying! He did this to trap me!" "Make him take them out." The officer looked from the bollards to me, then back to Brenda. He was experienced enough to know that every dispute has two sides, and he was just beginning to sense that the hysterical side might not be the truthful one. "Sir, do you have proof these vehicles are on your property without permission?" he asked. "I do," I said. I opened the Brenda project folder. The first thing I handed him was a copy of my property deed with the description of the attached garage clearly highlighted. "This is my property." Next, I handed him the photo I had taken of Brenda's condescending note taped to my door. "This is the note she left, in which she admits to placing her vehicles in my garage. Note the lack of my signature or any indication of my consent." Then I showed him the printout of the threatening email, where she claimed HOA authority and threatened to fine me. "And this is the email she sent yesterday, trying to intimidate me into letting her continue trespassing." Finally, I handed him the crown jewel, the 147-page HOA covenant document, with several key sections marked with bright yellow tabs. "And this, officer, is the HOA rulebook she claims gives her authority. I've tabbed the relevant sections for you. Page 42. Section C defines emergency powers, which you'll see apply only to common areas in the case of a natural disaster, neither of which applies here. And page 78, the section on nuisances, which expressly forbids the storage of unlicensed, leaking commercial vehicles on any property, public or private." As the officer took the documents and began to read, his expression shifted from weary patience to focused interest. He flipped through the pages, his eyes scanning the highlighted sections. Brenda, seeing her authority being systematically dismantled by my meticulous documentation, started to panic. That's taken out of context. You don't understand the nuances," she stammered. I delivered the final blow. "Furthermore, officer," I said, pulling out the last document from my folder, "her claim to be operating an HOA-sanctioned business is also questionable. This is a printout from the state and county business registries. Brenda's Bespoke Contracting is not a licensed or registered entity. Her trucks are commercial vehicles for an undeclared business. And as you can see, I pointed to the dark stain on my garage floor, visible from the driveway. They are leaking fluid onto my property, which is another violation of the covenants she claims to enforce." The officer looked up from the papers, his gaze now cold and hard, and settled on Brenda. The power dynamic on the driveway had just undergone a seismic shift. I was no longer the accused. I was the well-documented victim. Brenda, the supposed community leader and enforcer of rules, was exposed as a fraud, a bully, and a trespasser. The neighbors who were watching saw it all. They saw her hysteria, my calm, and the officer's undeniable shift in allegiance. Her public authority crumbled right there on my driveway, turning to dust at the foot of 3 steel bollards. The officer finished reviewing my folder, closed it, and handed it back to me with a respectful nod. He then turned to face Brenda, and his entire demeanor had changed. The weary peacemaker was gone, replaced by an officer of the law addressing a citizen who was clearly and demonstrably in the wrong. "Ma'am," he said, his voice now firm and official, "based on the evidence presented by the property owner, it appears you are the one who is trespassing, not the other way around." Brenda's face went through a rapid series of emotions: shock, denial, then pure, sputtering rage. "What? Trespassing? He's the one who put up these poles. I am the president of the Homeowners Association," she yelled, as if the title were a magical shield. "Your position as HOA president does not give you the right to store your personal property inside a private citizen's locked garage without their consent," the officer stated flatly. "In fact, according to your own bylaws, which Mr. Henderson was kind enough to provide, you are in violation of several covenants yourself. As for these bollards, he has every right to install security features on his own property. There is no crime here. This is a civil matter." "Civil matter?" she shrieked. "You have to make him move them. I need my trucks. My contractors are waiting." Her voice was cracking now, the desperation setting in. "I cannot make him do anything," the officer said, his patience clearly gone. "He has not broken any laws. You, on the other hand, are currently trespassing. I suggest you make arrangements to have your vehicles removed from his property at your own expense." He then turned to me. "Sir, for your own protection, I'd recommend you document everything." "Which it appears you already have," he added with a hint of a smile. "If she harasses you further or refuses to leave, you can call us back." With that, the officer gave Brenda one last warning look, got back in his cruiser, and drove away. The legal authority she had summoned to smite me had instead validated my position and left her standing alone and exposed in the middle of the street. The show was over. The neighbors, having seen enough, began to retreat back into their homes, their hushed conversations leaving no doubt as to who the victor was. Brenda was left standing there, her face pale, her pink tracksuit suddenly looking cheap and pathetic. Her power had evaporated. All that was left was the cold, hard reality of 3 steel posts and 2 very large, very trapped trucks. She looked at me, her eyes filled with a venomous hatred I had never seen before. "You will regret this," she hissed, her voice low and trembling. I simply looked at her, my expression neutral. I didn't need to say a word. The bollard said everything for me. I turned, walked back into my house, and closed the door, leaving her to contemplate her new, very stationary problem. The aftermath was swift and beautiful. For 2 days, the truck sat in my garage, a monument to her arrogance. Her urgent driveway resurfacing had to be put on hold. She tried everything. She called a tow truck company, but the driver took one look at the situation and said he couldn't possibly get the trucks out without demolishing the garage door or the bollards, a liability he wouldn't touch. She tried calling the other HOA board members, but news of her public humiliation had spread like wildfire. None of them wanted to be associated with her blatant abuse of power. Her allies deserted her. Finally, on the 3rd day, my doorbell rang. It was Brenda. Her face was haggard, stripped of all its usual bluster. She looked defeated. "What do you want, Brenda?" I asked through the closed door. "Please," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "I need to get my trucks out. I'll do whatever you want." The cage had worked. The dragon was tamed. I opened the door and laid out my terms. They were simple and non-negotiable. First, a written formal letter of resignation from her position as HOA president and from the board entirely, effective immediately. Second, a certified check made out to me for the cost of the materials and tool rental for the bollards, plus a fee for my time and the damage to my garage floor. Third, a written apology to me, admitting she had acted without authority and had been trespassing. And fourth, the vehicles would only be removed by a professional insured crew who would be responsible for cutting the bollards at ground level, at her expense and under my supervision. She choked at the terms, but she had no choice. 2 days later, a crestfallen Brenda slid a manila envelope through my mail slot containing her resignation, her apology, and a check that more than covered my expenses. That afternoon, a crew with a heavy-duty angle grinder spent 3 hours showering my driveway with sparks, painstakingly cutting through the thick steel of each post. As her 2 trucks were finally driven out of my garage, a small crowd of neighbors gathered, watching in silent approval. The tyranny was over. The HOA held an emergency meeting and elected a new president, the quiet gardener Mr. Henderson, who immediately proposed a full review of the bylaws to add clauses explicitly preventing any future abuse of power. My grandpa and I became quiet legends. We never bragged, but people knew. They knew that when a bully pushed too far, a quiet engineer and a retired welder had responded not with anger, but with precision, planning, and 3 feet of steel-reinforced justice. The lesson here is simple. When you're faced with a bully who hides behind rules, don't just get angry. Get smart. Read the fine print. Find their weaknesses and use the system they abuse against them. Sometimes, the most powerful statement you can make isn't a loud shout, but the quiet, permanent installation of a well-placed security feature. So, what do you think? Have you ever had to use an antagonist's own rulebook against them? Let me know in the comments below.